through my research in publishing a route guide, I learned just how complex the region is in terms of the humanitarian crisis, how many people are actually dying in the borderlands in this whole area that we're riding our bikes. And from there, I decided to host Ruta Del Jefe as more of a intentional event.
Sarah, thanks so much for joining us. For our listeners out in the world, where did you come from? Where'd you grow up?
So I spent my early childhood in Southern California, and then I moved to Southwest Ohio and spent my early adult years and adolescence in Southwest Ohio.
Do you currently live in Ohio?
No, I currently live in Durango, Colorado now.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Let's talk about cycling and the joy of cycling. Where and when do you remember first learning about bikes and learning to ride a bike and discovering the joy of cycling?
Yeah, so I learned how to ride a bike at a pretty young age, just like in a cul-de-sac in California, but I didn't really learn about the joy that cycling brought people until I was 12 years old, and I was working at the Loveland Bike and Skate Rental in Ohio. And through working at this bike rental, it was on a bike path that was like a 70-mile rails to trail bike path, and it brought people from all over the tri-state area to ride cruiser bikes up and down this bike path, and all different types of people. And so it was really there that I learned that how much joy bicycles brought to people, and learned that for myself personally eventually once I graduated from high school and found road cycling.
Did you ever race at an early age?
No. I actually didn't know that bicycles were a hobby or a sport that you could do. I always did like traditional sports growing up, played field hockey in high school, but my family came from running and like marathons, and so I always thought that was like the only option for me, and I hated running. So once I realized that cycling was another way to use for fitness, I really became attached to that.
Awesome. So you never raced, but did you follow racing? Like, were there any heroes of the sport that you sort of looked out for?
Well, when I first started getting into cycling, my dad had just recently gotten into road cycling as well, just, a couple years prior. And he always watched the Tour de France. It was something that we, late in high school and early college days, I just sat, the summer days at my parents' house watching the Tour de France every day with him. So definitely was a Lance Armstrong child, went to the Tour de France in one of his comeback years, and then became very disillusioned by the whole sport shortly thereafter. Other than that, my exposure to racing didn't really happen until cyclocross, and I got kind of into cyclocross shortly after I got into cycling as well.
Was that your sort of first jump into performance cycling, cyclocross, you'd say?
Yeah, that, and I did a couple of sprint triathlons early on. I didn't like the running, so it wasn't a very good fit for me, but cyclocross was a lot of fun. I really liked cyclocross, and I first got into cyclocross on a single speed bike, and did that for probably 5 years.
Tell me about your transition then from being an amateur cyclist, cyclocross, enthusiast, to this incredible sort of outdoors bike packing adventurer. How did that come about?
Yeah, so well, it started with the cyclocross bike for me. Like I said, I originally got into road cycling. So I was doing distance, a lot of distance rides. And for me, the bicycle, what I fell in love with it was just how it could take me to places in Ohio or Indiana or Northern Kentucky that I'd never been to before. And so I'd always kind of had this pretty negative view of the place I was calling home growing up, and didn't feel like it had, what I was exposed to as a child, like all these national parks and wild spaces in Southern California. But the bicycle allowed me to kind of get out to places that were beautiful and really interesting to me. And so when I got more into cyclocross and got a cyclocross bike with gears, I started doing distance rides on gravel roads in Southwest Ohio, and just finding, I became obsessed with maps and looking at where I could potentially find gravel in Southwest Ohio. And yeah, it was kind of like a deep dive. Once I did that, I just started riding everywhere, I'd go to North Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia, like the whole region, to ride gravel roads. And yeah, and then bikepacking just seemed like the next transition. It was like a way to see more, without having to like go home and come back and go again. So it was just a way to get
Right.
more distance and see more stuff.
Cool. And how'd you end up getting to Durango from Ohio then?
Well, I actually owned a bike shop in Ohio for 5 years. It was called Swallow Bicycle Works, and throughout my time with Swallow Bicycle Works, I developed, I started hosting rides, and the more time I spent owning a shop, the more I was getting into cycling myself, and eventually was given this opportunity by Specialized to become one of their first adventure ambassadors back in 2015. And so with that money that I was getting from them, I decided to take a sabbatical essentially from the bike shop and ride my bike from east to west across the country on dirt roads, following a dual sport motorcycle route called the TAT. And at the time, there was no other cyclist known to have done that route. So I was just getting all my information from YouTube videos from dual sport motorcyclists. And yeah, I started that ride with my partner at the time in August of 2015, and we finished 3 months later in October, and it was about 5,000 miles, mostly all dirt roads. And once I finished that, I realized that I wanted to keep doing that. And that it was time to kind of move on from Ohio and the bike shop, and to see what else I could do. And so spent quite a few years later just bike touring. So bike toured all over the Pacific Northwest and Cascadia, down the Baja Divide about 1.5 times. And yeah, I was just really obsessed, living out of my van for a little while, and then eventually settled into where I am now, where I spend, half the year in Durango and then half the year in Tucson, Arizona.
Amazing. What a cool journey and what a cool trip.
Yeah.
We're going to move to the next sort of chapter of the show called the speed round or the sprint. I'm going to throw out two different comparable words to you, and I'm just curious to know, and I know our listeners would be curious to know sort of which one of these two things you love more or less. It's a pretty simple concept, so we'll start now. Gloves or gloveless?
Gloveless, although I might be converting to gloves because I'm having some hand numb issues. So we might be changing, but I've just been traditionally gloveless, and that might be my problem.
All right, pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
Gels or real food?
Real food.
Cold weather or hot weather?
That's a tough one. Just depends on if I'm camping or if I'm sleeping in a shelter at night. I'd say hot weather.
All right. If you had to choose one of these inclement weathers, rain or snow?
Rain.
Spicy or mild?
Mild.
Pavement or dirt?
Dirt.
Definitely.
Definitely.
Power meter or perceived effort?
Perceived effort.
Full face helmet or half shell?
Half shell.
Yeah, of course.
I've never worn a full face helmet before.
Cables or wireless?
I'm a big fan of wireless.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the meaty part of the show here. So we're going to just talk more about, or I'm interested, and I know our listeners are interested into like some of the major projects that you're working on, and if anyone that's sort of followed your journey has seen, you've got a lot of really incredible adventures and journeys. Let's start with one of the big ones. Tell us about Ruta.
Yeah, so Ruta Del Jefe is an event that I host in southern Arizona. And it's an event that is focused on raising awareness to the biodiversity of southern Arizona in the Sky Islands region, and also the humanitarian crisis that is happening there. So what Ruta does is we bring cyclists together in a really special location, and bring representatives from various different conservation, indigenous, and humanitarian aid organizations to speak to the riders the night before they ride, and then to tell them about all the important and essential work that they're doing in the area. We also do like bird walks and habitat tours. And then on the next day, the cyclists go out to do their choice of 5 different rides. We've got everything from 28 miles to 136 miles. And then, the idea is to instill a greater appreciation and awareness of the places that we ride, and hopefully build advocacy and advocates out of this event. I should say that the name Ruta del Jefe is named after the infamous jaguar El Jefe that roamed the Santa Rita Mountains about 7 years ago, and he hasn't been seen in 7 years until and everybody thought he was dead. Thought that a rancher killed him, and we just didn't know where he was. But a month ago, he was spotted in Sonora, Mexico. So he still lives on, and so that's just very exciting. Ruta news for us. But yeah, so Ruta del Jefe is an evolving project. We've been invited to a 130,000 acre natural preserve down in Sonora called Cuenca Los Ojos. And it's actually the location of the 2 latest jaguars that are spotted in the borderlands. It's also the location of like Mexican wolves, black bear, mountain lion, beavers. There's year-round water in this location. And so, Ruta is going to be evolving into a binational event that we discuss, not only the biodiversity and the beauty of these landscapes, but also the impacts of the border wall in that location, specifically on human migration and animal migration. Because for these jaguars to be right there at the border and have a 30-foot border wall with 6-inch gaps, jaguars cannot migrate to their habitat, which is and has been all the way up to has extended all the way out to the just into southern Arizona. So their habitat, they belong in southern Arizona. They are in at the border, but they can't get across. So, we want to raise that awareness and support the organizations that are trying to, create animal migration gates or alternatives with border security so that animals can get through, because the border wall is not keeping anyone and any humans out, but it's doing a really good job at keeping animals out.
I'm trying to picture what a jaguar looks like. What does a jaguar look like? What kind of animal is it?
Well, it's a cat, and it's a very mystical and magical creature. It's a very thick but large creature. It exists all the way down, from the Amazon all the way up through Mexico. So they've got a huge territory. I've got just like this little pin here. This more looks like a cheetah, but you'll have to look it up. They're very magical.
Can you bring it up to the camera? I'd love to see it.
Let me grab something else real quick, because I think that this is a cheetah, so it's not accurate.
This will be interesting. I wasn't sure whether it was jaguar or jaguar, but we'll see.
We've got a few images here of the jaguar. This is a good.
Oh yeah. Okay. And is it? Am I just hearing it differently? Is this different than a jaguar?
It's the same. Jaguar.
Okay.
Jaguar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just hearing it differently. I'm like, is that different than a jaguar? Like the car? Same animal.
The car is named after the animal. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
That is incredible. Sarah, did you found the Ruta del Jefe event yourself?
I did, and it came about from establishing the Sky Islands Odyssey bikepacking routes down in southern Arizona. And so I started with those. I created 3 bikepacking routes around the Santa Rita Mountains, just south of Tucson. And in that, through that process, I initially was drawn to the beauty of the landscape and the diversity of the landscape, because you can ride from grasslands to, pine forest, and then to low desert landscape, all within one ride. And I was very drawn to that. As someone that has ridden their bicycle all around the world, I'm easily bored. So if, a landscape that changes quickly is very entertaining for someone like me.
Sure.
But yeah, I started with those bikepacking routes, and through my research in publishing a route guide for that, I learned just how complex the region is in terms of, the humanitarian crisis, how many people are actually dying in the borderlands in this whole area that we're riding our bikes. And from there, I, decided to host Ruta Del Jefe as more of a intentional event focused on raising that awareness. And, I think it's more important now than ever, especially now that Southern Arizona is getting this reputation of being a gravel Disneyland for people, just to be aware of, where you're at and how complex, the issues are, and just be respectful of that, and I think that that's really important that we all keep in mind, especially since it's such one of the only and one of the best places to go to ride gravel in the wintertime.
Right. I can imagine the complexities of just putting on an event and organizing it, but also in that terrain. I can only imagine that there'd be some scary moments too, whether it be animals or terrain. Have you ever had a scary moment, either out on the trails or in the planning or organization?
No, I not with animals, unfortunately, as much as I embrace and I try to channel the jaguar to come, present itself to me. I've never had any scary encounters. I have had encounters with people who are migrating. Through the borderlands, and those, if anything, have just been really hard and sad encounters. And so that's kind of the toughest thing that I've experienced out there is just
Right.
people just in a really desperate situation.
People trying to cross the border, literally,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
to,
people who have already crossed the border and are lost, and don't have food or water and are trying to get to Phoenix, and they're 20 miles north of the border. So that's
wow.
that's a tough taste of reality. And knowing that how many people die that way is also you know just something that is tough to be faced with when you're on a bike ride. But like growing up in Ohio, I had no idea what was happening. You read in the news and you experience what you see in the news, but the reality of the situation is a lot more tough. And I don't think that the news or what we are fed through media is not an accurate depiction of how much suffering is actually happening down there.
Right. Right. Wow. Incredible. Is Ruta capped at a certain number of participants?
It has, in its traditional sense. It's been capped at like 150 people. With our new venue, we might be able to have a little bit more, but yeah, like we're actually moving the event, so the event's kind of in a transition state right now, to go to a new venue. And so, yeah, we'll see what capacity this new venue can have. But an important part that I realized, I mean, I thought that our last year in this past year in 2022, we had about 150 to 170 people there, and that was a very special experience. In terms of community, everybody felt like they were family at the end of the weekend. And I think that as you increase the number of participants, you kind of lose that element of like really tight-knit community. And that's really something that's important to me. That's something like, for me, when I go to kind of these modern gravel events these days, I feel very alone in terms of like, thousands of people there. And that's never where Ruta Del Jefe is going to go. Like we'll always be small, and it'll be very focused on creating, a safe and inclusive and just a really intentional community.
Great. I'd be curious, are there any new community projects that you're thinking of or working on?
Ruta del Jefe consumes most of my, free time when I'm not riding my bike. I have like other projects, like I've been invited to other, private land and conservation areas to to kind of see what the potential is there for creating intentional like cycling opportunities. But I'm really focused right now on seeing what the potential is with Cuenca, Los Ojos, and bringing Ruta del Jefe to that location. And, that's going to be very community oriented in just the organizational aspect of that event in terms of, me collaborating with Sonoran bicyclists and working together to create this binational event. So that takes up all of my spare time mostly. So
Yeah, I can only imagine.
I do some coaching here and there, whenever I can. I coach, girls exploras here, and it's through the Devo program here in Durango, and definitely looking to do more of coaching in Southern Arizona this winter. But I also host just like really fun community rides, adventure rides that are more casual. So if you're in Southern Arizona this winter, like January and February, I'll be hosting, the Sky Islands adventure rides, which, I share my favorite routes in the area, and but no support. It's all self-supported, and we just go out and have fun. And it's no drop. We all just have fun, eat snacks, and play hacky sack and ride tough routes.
I love that you just threw the "it's no drop" in there. I had a question that I wanted to ask. What does no drop mean to you?
Yeah, it means that we regroup at major intersections. So we wait for everybody to show up at that point, and then we all carry on. So I know that can feel like uncomfortable for some people, and everybody's just like, I want to get to the end of the ride. But regrouping also is a nice break to just hang out off of our bikes, and just gives us more of an opportunity to like converse and hang out while we're waiting for other people. And it just feels better to wait for everybody rather than just leave them out to survive on their own, which I'm sure they can. And sometimes that's required. Sometimes people are just like, leave me. And we're like, okay, we'll see you at the end. But,
I'm done. Yeah. Well, cool. Sarah, if our listeners were interested in learning more about Ruta del Jefe or Sky Islands or any other projects that you're working on, where do they find information?
Yeah. So you can find like everything that I do on my website. So it's sarahjswallow.com. But Ruta del Jefe has its own website and Instagram. So you just rutadeljefe.com, and then the Instagram's at Ruta del Jefe. And then the Sky Islands Odyssey bikepacking routes are available on bikepacking.com. But yeah, I'm Sarah J. Swallow on Instagram, so you can follow me too. I usually post about things that are important when they're important.
Well, it's been super awesome talking to you and learning about what you've done on the bike and what you do off the bike. Super excited about the work that Ruta del Jefe does, and gosh, I want to join one year.
Yeah, well, you're welcome to.
Is it hard to get in, or?
It is. So I have kind of a tiered registration. I have priority registration for BIPOC and LGBTQ plus folks. But then, if you follow if you subscribe to my newsletter, I usually give the newsletter subscribers kind of the next dibs. But in the future, I'm going to, rather than make it just a mad dash to whoever's first to get registered, I will have a lottery situation. But yeah, it can be hard to get in. But if you pay close attention, you do it. You just got to pay attention, and you'll get in there.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, Sarah, thanks so much for your time, and good luck with all the planning for next year's event.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.